Most of us prefer to think that we are talented in certain areas and above average in others. Indeed, some of us are quite good in certain areas. But the truth is that we are often mistaken in our self-assessment. You probably both overestimate and underestimate your abilities in different areas of life. These errors of perception may surprise you more than you think. In 1999, psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger demonstrated a phenomenon that would later become known as the Dunning-Kruger Effect. In their research, they administered tests on humor, logical reasoning, and grammar to participants. They then asked them to rate how they evaluated their own performance compared to others. Dunning and Kruger's research found that people who performed poorly on tests tended to overestimate their own performance. On the other hand, those who did well tended to misjudge their own abilities compared to their peers. This research has revealed an important cognitive fallacy. People who lack sufficient knowledge or experience in a field have a hard time realizing how incompetent they actually are and tend to see themselves as more competent than they actually are. In contrast, knowledgeable and experienced individuals often underestimate or doubt their own abilities. This type of cognitive bias is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. Although this phenomenon is controversial among researchers and may seem paradoxical or bizarre at first glance, its logic is actually quite simple to grasp. If a person does not have enough knowledge or experience about a subject, he or she does not have enough knowledge to recognize his or her own inadequacy. That is, they don't even know enough to realize their shortcomings. If you are incompetent, you don't know you are incompetent. The skills needed to produce a correct answer are also needed to understand what the correct answer is, says Dunning. On the other hand, people who gain more knowledge and experience in a field realize how complex, extensive, and difficult success is. Therefore, they are more likely to doubt their own abilities. At the same time, because they tend to think that others are more competent, they may see themselves as more inadequate than they are. Research on the Dunning-Kruger effect provides striking examples, especially in areas such as driving. For example, studies show that 93% of American drivers rate themselves as above-average drivers. Similarly, in the workplace, the effect is widespread, with more than 40% of company employees rating themselves among the top 5% of performers. Of course, not everyone can be better than the majority. There must be a majority. As part of the processes of learning, strategizing, evaluation, and reflection, another process called metacognition comes into play. Metacognition is the awareness of one's own thought processes. That is, one's thoughts about thinking. An important part of the learning process and a key element of becoming competent in a subject is the ability to recognize errors, problems, and patterns in one's thinking, and to develop effective strategies to overcome them. According to Dunning and Kruger, if a person is deficient in a subject, their metacognitive skills in that area are also deficient. This prevents them from recognizing errors in their thought processes, and therefore they do not realize that they are wrong, which creates the impression in their minds that they never make mistakes. This phenomenon can be quite disturbing on an individual level, realizing that you don't know what you don't know. Maybe you already feel it, but the magnitude of these blind spots, the fact that you can get it wrong even in areas where you are confident, can make you uncomfortable. But this becomes much more disturbing at the societal level. According to Dunning, the intriguing point is that incompetence does not make people surprised, skeptical, or cautious. On the contrary, incompetent people often exhibit an unnecessary self-confidence backed by something superficial that resembles knowledge. Thus, as a consequence of the Dunning-Kruger effect, people who lack sufficient knowledge on a topic are often the most confident and loudest speakers. In contrast, more competent individuals tend to be quieter, more careful, and more cautious. Experts often find it difficult to communicate effectively with a wide audience because they are unable to correctly assess the difference in knowledge between themselves and the average individual. So, who is the most persuasive? An amateur who speaks with high confidence but is actually incompetent? A cautious and questioning intermediate knowledge holder? Or an expert who struggles to communicate with large audiences? It seems that the tendency to have an opinion on almost everything is becoming increasingly common. Perhaps this has always been the case, but it may have been exacerbated by the fact that despite having access to all the world's information, we often only read the headlines. For whatever reason, when the Dunning-Kruger effect kicks in, the voices that are heard most are often not the most knowledgeable, the most accurate, or the most useful. Rather, the voices that convey confidence and charisma stand out, not nuance and elaboration. The right voices are often lower, obscure, or in search of the right words and tools. Being influential and creating change is a worthy goal, but sometimes it is the silence that makes the biggest impact. Does the world need more voices or more conscious and attentive voices? There is an irony here. When we talk about silence, we are talking about being a voice. But the point is not to be completely silent, but to use our voice consciously and carefully. In conclusion, in a world where self-confidence is more important than knowledge, knowing how and when to be heard makes a big difference. The important thing is not to raise the loudest voice, but to raise the most meaningful and conscious voice. The real impact is not in speaking without thinking, but in speaking with thought, awareness, and care.